A nation's media is always a reflection of its socio-political and economic reality. What type of media has post-independent Sierra Leone produced? And how has that media shaped the national and international perceptions of this country? How far has the media of Sierra Leone come? Who are the men and women in the media that have made history? This research, therefore, is an independent media commission's initiative to report the media to the media. This study focuses on the day-to-day operations of the Independent Media Commission and how it interfaces with the media of Sierra Leone. Why was the Independent Media Commission constituted? What is the mandate of the Independent Media Commission? What has it achieved over the years? And what are the challenges ahead in regulating the media in a democratic dispensation in Sierra Leone? For many analysts, the media in Sierra Leone has grown and made gigantic leaps. But from other critics, the media has not made continuity with her glorious past.
We've done our best to make sure that at least there is a clear semblance of proper journalistic practice. We are also very, very satisfied that various governments have supported the media in an attempt, I'm using the word deliberately, attempt, to improve on the media. So it's here and there. We're trying our very best to make sure that we improve on it further.
I think that we have come a long way from where it was many years ago. The quality of journalism has improved. And we have more professional people who've received professional training actually practicing journalism now in Sierra Leone. Although we still have quite a few people who are not doing it the right way, are not very ethical in their practices, whether it's because they don't quite understand what they should be doing or is they are doing it deliberately. I'm not quite sure what it is.
We have continued to maintain a vibrant media, a media that has over the years been able to hold governments to account. So in a way, they are responsible for the reasonably good health of our democracy, in a way. However, there are still issues, like in most other West African countries. You still have a lot of rogue practitioners. You have practitioners who still have a lot of room for improvement. And there is the underlying media poverty. Yeah, not many people are encouraged to invest in the media.
But how free is the media in Sierra Leone? Cumulative post-war record of Reporters Without Borders has given a mixed baggage of high and low moments of the Sierra Leonean press, with a rating much higher than many countries in the sub-region.
It's very challenging. A matter that was brought against us by a human rights lawyer in the name of lawyer Pamomo Fofana, about seditious libel and defamation. We were incarcerated and put behind bars for about 4 to 5 days. But at the end of the day, the matter was thrown out of court. But the recent matter, which happens to be with the one that has to do with the chief minister, for which, as a media practitioner, all I did was to seek clarification of an investigation that was ongoing. And I was manhandled. I was put behind bars just for seeking clarification. And as I speak, my phones are still at the CID. They've not been given, my phone has not been given to me back, and the matter has not been charged to court. We are now coming close to a year, and the matter has not been charged to court.
It's never a smooth sailing. I've been to prison. The first newspaper that I edited was the New Breed newspaper, and I fell foul of the military regime at the time. Ended up at Pademba Road Prison, charged with sedition and criminal libel, etc., etc. In and out of Pademba Road a couple of times. Eventually found guilty, but we were given the option of a fine, so paid the fine. gave notice of appeal. And this was in 1993.
Every regime, since I started in 83, 84 under Shaki, ultimately I confronted all the different regimes and I paid the price for it.
While the corridors of power have enjoyed a certain rapprochement with the press in cocktails and subventions for the Sierra Leone Association of Journalists on one hand, journalists with seeming dissenting voices on the other hand have come in for a lot of rough times.
Journalists have a lot of power. Just the human rights activist Malcolm X, who said, and I quote, "The media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent."
With a media that has been historically characterized by neat political fault lines between the two dominant political parties, it begs the question when journalism is journalism and when it eventually becomes political public relations. Post-war Sierra Leone has witnessed an exponential media revolution in which the press that was traditionally state-owned and controlled with only SLBS has now become a reality in which districts, individuals, and religious bodies are now owning and running media houses. 130 newspapers and magazines, 165 radio stations, 32 television stations, including satellite links direct to home DTH. While newspapers are generic in their coverage with just a handful specialized in health, commerce, and education, radio has morphed into classes of being commercial, community, religious, and teaching. With the policies that had always dogged the media in this country, and with the unfavorable business climate that had characterized Sierra Leone for decades, investing massively in the media has always been a risky business. But there are Sierra Leoneans who chose to take the road less traveled.
My dream has always been how to give back to society. So the AYV dream was for the people of Sierra Leone. Basically, it was a platform that I believed I was only used by God Almighty as an ambassador. But I provided the platform for Sierra Leone, and it was for Sierra Leone.
Western Urban alone houses 94% of the print media, leaving the rest of the country with only 6%. Radio, unlike the generic nature of the print media reportage system, tends to democratize the landscape, with 34% concentration in the Western Urban area, leaving the rest of the country to share the spoils of 66%. And is grouped along the categories of commercial, community, religious, teaching, with international relay stations of the BBC, VOA, and Radio France International being a separate group of their own. But as the problems of regulating the media became onerous, and many human rights organizations and political parties felt that media freedom was being suppressed, the need arose for an independent media commission to monitor and regulate the press in Sierra Leone.
Luckily for us, we in SLAJ at the time had a good relationship with President Kaba and were able to convince him. Then, of course, again, luckily for us, the minister at the time was a journalist himself, Julius Spencer. So we all agreed to address the issues of the Public Order Act. President Kaba advised us, he said, okay, start from the business of having a regulatory authority that would have both journalists and members of government in it to be able to address the issues of journalists in this country. So this was how we started. So Julius Spencer was very, very aggressive in making sure that we worked towards the setting of the IMC. And I was also, and Ibrahim Taiba, were also very active in making sure that we worked with the government. And we did have a collaborative effort with the government to make sure that we set up the Independent Media Commission.
the formation of the IMC, it is from For the People newspaper. When I came from Sweden, you know, which Gordon by then was Secretary General of SLAG. Yes, the college, the mass communication, it was under Jipu Felix George as president when I was Secretary General of the Saloon Association of Journalists with Bernadette Cole. That the mass communication was established.
Well, our mandate is to ensure that we run a free and pluralistic press in the Republic of Sierra Leone. Our mandate also asks us, demands that we ensure that journalists practice their profession intelligently, responsibly, and avoid any kind of unfair, inaccurate reporting or journalism. We are also to ensure that we protect the public as well as journalists against any form of exploitation and abuse of power.
Against the backdrop of the discussions generated by the repeal of the criminal libel law, concerns were raised as to what was there to serve as a safeguard in case of abuses of the newfound freedom on the part of journalists. While the civil libel law still exists in which aggrieved persons could seek redress in the courts, many media pundits are of the opinion that infringements concerning journalists are best handled by the commission that has the mandate to regulate the media rather than by the courts.
The IMC has done remarkably well up to this point. Simply because the people who have always been nominated to the IMC have always been journalists themselves, or people who are interested in journalism, and those people who always would want to see journalism prosper in this country.
We depend merely on government subvention and on the fees for licensing that we collect from time to time. So my appeal is we need assistance. Because without assistance, financial material, we can not really effectively manage the affairs of this. All our programs are lined up. Strategic plan for 2020 to 2023, they are all there. But we cannot achieve them, we cannot accomplish them without support. So we ask the government and other international partners to help us to build up this commission. We really need assistance. There are a lot of work. You know, journalism is a very responsible profession. We also need support. Without support, it will be difficult to fulfill those goals.
I honestly think that the IMC will have their job cut out for them. That is why I'm heartened by the fact that they have started taking preemptive steps already. I know the IMC has been across the country to educate journalists about their responsibilities in the post-repeal era, and the citizens generally about the recourse mechanisms open to them, even in the absence of the criminal libel. I'm also aware that they have been doing a lot of education. So this is very good. They are situating themselves for the challenges ahead. But as ministry, we really think we have to resource them better. We have to enhance their capacity so that they are able to rise to the challenges that the post-repeal era will bring.
The Independent Media Commission, IMC, which started its operation in 2001, came into existence by the Independent Media Commission Act number 12 of 2000, as amended in 2006 and 2007, which provided for the establishment of an autonomous body for the regulation of mass media institution and for other matters connected therewith.
Well, I must say the Independent Media Commission thus far is making progress. So we have also reviewed the Media Code of Practice, which was done in 2011, and several other reviews have taken place. It was the last time we were in Parliament. Parliament was asking for safeguards, and the Independent Media Commission is the body they are looking to provide the safeguards, and the acts particularly. And in terms of activities, the Commission has done so much. Last year, we were able to engage in major activities, like we We had an activity on the tour of the media across the country, and we were able to discover a lot of things that that are happening in the respective media houses that are operational across the country. And also we'll be able to launch the Advertising Advisory Committee for the very first time.
Now, post-war Sierra Leone witnessed a proliferation of the media against the backdrop that before the war, we only had a state broadcaster. And with the close of the war, we saw a proliferation of many media houses to an extent that in every district now, at least you have a radio station or two. So that was phenomenal. It was great. And there was a lot of funding for radio stations and media houses, and they multiplied in the country. And therefore, there was need to form the Independent Media Commission for Regulation of the Media. Now, this particular study has been inspired by the fact that as a commission, we noticed initially there was a lot of momentum, a lot of political will to move the repeal of the criminal libel law. We saw attempts by the government to always stage on a yearly basis cocktails with the media. Subvention for sludge was approved. And we also saw clearly an improvement in the fact that many pronouncements from the minister, pronouncements from the president himself, and eventually it passed the assent through the cabinet. So we saw remarkable progress. But in Parliament, however, we noticed there was a momentary lull. And as regulators, we came back to our senses to think clearly and say, where are we heading? If the media is looking for freedom, wants freedom, let's go back and start checking if they are in compliance with statutory laws. And so that's the basis of this particular Meet the Media tour that initiated this particular research right around the country. The object for which the commission is established include promoting a free and pluralistic press throughout Sierra Leone, ensuring that the media institutions achieve the highest level of efficiency in the provision of media services, and protecting the interest of the public against exploitation or abuse by media institutions. The challenges to regulate the media were onerous, but right from inception, the Independent Media Commission (IMC) was limited in its mandate as provided by the Act and in the resources to effectively monitor and regulate the media right around the country.
The training of journalists remains our concern, because in our provincial tours, we observe that many things are lacking. Some radio stations, we don't even have reporters. They employ people on voluntary basis to report, with no incentive. Some radio stations don't even have a board. These are all the requirements that radio stations and newspapers should fulfill. But we hope that by next year, these are going to be the conditions for every newspaper and radio station to be fulfilled. Otherwise, it will be difficult for us to give a clean plate for operation.
Therefore, for many, a strong and vibrant IMC was necessary and in dire need of a stronger financial muscle to regulate the media all over the country.
Well, the most urgent thing, if we were to ask me, is to improve on the ability of newspapers and radio stations to be professional. And this in itself would suggest that over the period, the media has been starved of funding. And because it was always starved of funding, the very important component that should make good journalistic practice is always missing. People sometimes say in passing that, oh, people do not invest in the media. But of course, this in itself has a lot to do with the kind of policy framework put together by the government. If the policy framework is not conducive, then of course people will not invest in the media. But to respond to your question, yes, we need funding to make sure that journalistic practice is improved upon. And we need that one very, very urgently.
In June 2020, an IMC Act titled the Independent Media Commission Act 2020 was tabled by the Ministry of Information and Communication that was aimed at capacitating the institution as a safeguard for the repeal of the criminal libel law that has, however, attracted some reactions from the public and from journalists.
They failed to consult with especially those of us who will be affected by this piece of legislation, as is normally the due process. There was some kind of ulterior motive behind it. Now, when you look at the content of the act itself, there are certain issues or clauses or provisions which I've highlighted and I've already brought to the notice and attention of members of the public, particularly the Guild of Editors. It may interest you to know that the Guild of Editors Sierra Leone, which is the umbrella body for all newspaper editors, was completely excluded from this particular consultation, and of course there was no validation process. That one is not to my knowledge.
Today, the nation stands at a crossroad, having won a very meaningful battle of expunging Part 5 of the 1965 Public Order Act, which criminalizes libel and has been very inimical to the operations of the media in this country. Today also we stand on the threshold of an IMC that has been greatly strengthened to effectively monitor and regulate the media in the length and breadth of Sierra Leone. The decision between the criminal libel law on one hand and a strengthened IMC with powers to enforce its mandate was a very difficult decision for journalists to make, but eventually that bridge has been thankfully crossed.
Your efforts, Mr. Speaker, when you mentioned the names of some of our very important members. May I state, Mr. Speaker, that it would be a great error on my part if I did not recognize the important journalists such as Daisy Bona, the late Francis Frank Musoa, who later became a member of Parliament and who was president of the Association of Journalists, Christo Johnson. After the war, Mr. Speaker, when it became necessary for us to look at the country in a wholesome manner once more, and when President Kaba invited some of us stakeholders to a meeting, why wouldn't you look at the regulatory component of a profession, gentlemen, before we move on to this 1965 Public Order Act? We agree with him. And then we started looking forward to the setting of the Independent Media Commission. Mr. Speaker, our thinking at the time was that the IMC would be the beginning of a regulatory authority by journalists in this country. Now, as we all agreed at the time that after 10 years of an IMC, we would have put in place a motion that would make the IMC self-regulatory.
I'm very excited, to the extent that on the day Parliament voted to repeal it, I shed tears of joy. It had been a very long, drawn-out battle, lasting almost 50 years. So when it happened on that day, I was completely overwhelmed. I think it's one of the brightest days in our recent history that this very obnoxious law, which basically criminalized free speech, is no longer in our statutes. I'm really very excited it is. And I feel it'll completely change the media landscape in Sierra Leone, in the sense that those private sector investors who, because of the repressive nature of this law, wouldn't want to invest in the media industry, would now invest in it because they don't stand the risk of being picked up and locked up simply because of the contents of a newspaper. Because under the old law, even the printing press owner would be held liable. So would the newspaper vendor. So I believe that with that law gone, there will be more investment.
Against the backdrop of the discussions generated by the repeal of the criminal libel law, concerns were raised as to what was there to serve as a safeguard in case of abuses of the newfound freedom on the part of journalists. While the civil libel law still exists in which aggrieved persons could seek redress in the courts, many media pundits are of the opinion that infringements concerning journalists are best handled by the commission that has the mandate to regulate the media rather than by the courts. Still in search of a safeguard, doubts started arising as to how much is the media that has the onerous responsibility in society as the watchdog in compliance with basic statutory laws in the media. On a nationwide tour, the Independent Media Commission conducted a countrywide survey to test compliance of media houses to statutory laws. During the national tour, the IMC visited 122 media houses, which is representing 40% of the total media institutions in this country that are operated as at 2019. However, more media houses took part in the meetings held in the various locations.
Everyone is very clumsy. Your manager can ask this one and make any financial decision.
The one that we hold the cash.
No. What is the general ledger? You're an accountant, sir. What is the general ledger? You record every financial transaction. 2019 is finishing. 2020, make sure you keep a strict financial record. Okay?
Journalism is a profession, a work. And any work where there exists against no law, how will you go about to do that work?
That is from 1965 to now. Now that law they may not hang over journalism in this country. We give power to anybody within authority for arrest journalists as and when he want, they go lock them up. And the key indicators the research was looking at was whether a media house had a board, whether it had a constitution or memorandum and article of association, whether it had a certificate of registration, whether the institution had a management structure, whether the institution paid salaries that are within or above the minimum wage, whether the media institution pays NACIT for its staff, whether the media institution pays payee tax, whether the media institution keeps records of withholding tax, whether the media institution has an editorial policy, a guideline, or a code, whether the media institution has a program schedule for television and radio stations, whether the media institution has an archive of programs or articles that are published, whether the media institution transmits within the wattage that is apportioned to it, and whether the media institution has started preparing for the migration from analog to digital broadcasting or to online publishing for newspapers. Finally, whether the media institution publishes or broadcasts stories and issues of national interest. The findings of this particular research are interesting as the graphs and illustrations show them. For media institutions that have a board to regulate its affairs, 63% of the media houses had a board and 37% never had a board. As to whether media institutions had a constitution, a memorandum, an article of association as established by an act of parliament, our findings were 82% had a constitution while 18% never had one. On the renewal and display of their certificate, 62% never renewed and displayed their certificates, while only 38% of the media houses had renewed and displayed their certificates. For media houses who had a management structure, 65% had a management structure, while 35% did not have one. On media houses that pay salaries within or above the minimum wage, 59% never paid, while 40% paid salaries that are within or above the minimum wage. For media houses that paid NACIT for their workers, Our findings give us that 66% of media houses do not pay NACIT for their workers, while 34% pay NACIT for their workers. On media houses that pay payee tax, only 30% are paying payee tax, while a whopping 70% do not pay payee tax. Of media institutions that keep record of withholding tax, only 23% of media houses in this country, while 77% media houses do not have a record of withholding tax. For media houses that have an editorial policy, guideline, or a code, our findings gave us that 56% did not have an editorial policy, a guideline, or a code, while only 44% had an editorial policy, a guideline, or a code. For media houses that have a program schedule, this is for radio and television, we discovered that 83% had a program schedule, while 17% never had one. On whether media houses had archives of programs for broadcast media or kept account of their articles published, we discovered that only 37% of media houses have an archive for both their programs broadcast and their articles, while 63% of the media do not have this form of archive. For media institutions that transmit within the prescribed wattage, our findings gave us that 67% are in breach, broadcasting sometimes above or outside the wattage prescribed for them, while only 33% of broadcast houses kept within the prescribed wattage given to them. On the level of preparedness into digital migration, it was discovered that only 18% of broadcast media is ready, while 82% is not yet ready for transfer into digital migration. On media institutions that broadcast or run stories on national issues, all media houses scored themselves a very high mark of 100% in this. In our findings, we noticed that many of the program schedules were only on paper, outdated, and were never really followed, both for radio and television. At the end of this exercise of the IMC's assessment of the media's statutory compliance, in which a vast majority of media houses were found to be non-compliant and in breach, it was agreed that these are the key challenges of the media in Sierra Leone: management problems, sustainability, programming, clarity of editorial policies, and problems of archiving. With the criminal libel law now firmly expunged from our law books, and with a strengthened IMC, hopes are high that the media in Sierra Leone is on a very good footing. We remind media practitioners that every freedom comes with a responsibility. Let us therefore build the image of the Sierra Leone media to a very credible and reputable standard that is responsible to society and promotes the common good. Let us endeavor to promote the spirit of professionalism in the media so that the best minds could be engaged in making this profession a noble and proud one. The Independent Media Commission is here to work with and for the media of Sierra Leone, in collaboration with stakeholders and the relevant authorities like the Ministry of Information and Communication, the Sierra Leone Association of Journalists and affiliate bodies, the Media Reform Coordinating Group, BBC Media Action, donor partners, the Bar Association, etc. On behalf of the Chairman and Commissioners and staff of the Independent Media Commission, we wish to thank His Excellency President Julius Maada Bio for believing in the media of Sierra Leone and empowering it. We thank the Parliament for passing this historic law. We thank the Minister of Information and Communication, Mohamed Rahman Soare. Profound thanks to the Sierra Leone Association of Journalists and all the gallant journalists over the years who sacrificed for press freedom in this country. Difid Osiwa. Finally, we want to thank all media practitioners who have put their faith in this profession. The media of Sierra Leone is on a new trajectory, and the hopes are high for a better Sierra Leone, land that we love, our Sierra Leone.